We are living in a computer-programmed reality, and the only clue we have to it is when some variable is changed and some alteration in our reality occurs. We would have the overwhelming impression that we were reliving the present, déjà vu, perhaps in precisely the same way, hearing the same words, saying the same words. I submit that these impressions are valid and significant, and I will even say this: such an impression is a clue that at some past time point a variable was changed, reprogrammed as it were, and that because of this an alternative world branched off.
Good morning and welcome to the Friday edition of Free Association Radio. This is the Friday FARcast. I am your host, Robert Phoenix. It is the 9th of November, 11/9, not 9/11, 2013. And this is the second show that I've had in the aftermath of the presidential election, which took place on Tuesday. I have some thoughts on that election, which I will share later in the show. There are more observations and perhaps a proclamation or two than anything else, but I will share them after the first hour. In the first hour here, I'm going to be playing you an interview that I did yesterday with author Brian Tui, and he is the author of The Fix is In. I discovered him through Darren Williams, who's been a guest on the show. He sent me a link to an interview that Brian did with Alex Jones about a week and a half ago, and I thought that it would be great to interview him. And I have a pretty vast working knowledge of sports and wanted to see if I could tap into Brian's work about the sports entertainment industry and how the major sports in this country are fixed. And Brian has come at this from a gambling perspective as well as a marketing and money-making perspective. And I come at it from a slightly different place, although there are some convergence points. I'm a big sports guy. I grew up with sports. I have Uranus in Leo in the 9th house. I have Jupiter in Sagittarius in the 1st house. So sports have been a conjunct. Sports have been a big part of my life. I played a lot of baseball, played basketball, I played football. I did karate as a kid. I was kind of the karate kid back in the 70s, raised on Bruce Lee, fought in karate tournaments. I did that thing. I was Ralph Macchio for a while. So sports has been a pretty big part of my life, and the viewing of it as well as the participating of it. So my relationship with sports changed over the years. And I began to see something very different happen with sports in the 80s and in the 90s, particularly. And it's when sports became huge, and I mean huge business. It was enormous, and it was with the advent of cable TV, because that's when the money for sports went through the roof. And cable TV contracts allowed teams to have more money, to spend more money on players, to spend more money on marketing. And now we have teams like the New York Yankees, the California Angels, who else? I believe the Dallas Cowboys. They have their own cable TV networks. The Yankees own the Yes Network, so the Yankees get. So, for instance, if the Yankees were on WABC in New York, WABC would get a portion of the ad revenue that would come through a Yankee game. The Yankees would get some of it, but most would go to WABC. Well, now because the Yankees have the Yes Network, every single piece of ad revenue that comes through that network, and they do air their games on that network, the Yankees get. So having their own networks, it's an enormous money-making operation for teams. And that's why teams like the Yankees and the Dodgers and the Texas Rangers, who have their own network, spend so much money because they make so much money. But that all started with cable TV back in the 80s, so sports began to change. When I started watching sports, there were 3 networks, ABC, NBC, and CBS. On the football front, CBS had the NFL, or the NFC, NBC had the AFC, and ABC had the Monday Night Football game. And that was it. And now it's changed dramatically. And there's also social media, which feeds into this thing. The numbers alone on the NFL, you'll hear this from Brian, in terms of the amount of revenue that the NFL generates, it is enormous. Absolutely enormous. We're talking the gross national product of a third world country. And so the NFL, the revenue associated with the NFL is broken down into 2 groups. There's the legal and traceable revenue, and that's everything from ticket sales to TV contracts to merchandising sales to licensing, which isn't necessarily merchandising. And then you have also the legal gambling money, which is traceable. And then there's the whole fantasy football economy, which has sprung up, which is enormous. And then you factor in all of the illegal money that's placed on football through bookies, through offshore betting, which in some places is illegal, and the amounts of money are staggering. So Brian's thrust with this is, if that money is available, then anybody who makes money wants to make money off that available money pool. It makes sense, right? I mean, if you are a prospector, don't you want to go to where all the nuggets are buried? Don't you want to go to that claim and spike that claim? Of course you do. So why wouldn't people who are interested in making money go to where all the money is being made? And then once they're there, why wouldn't they try to manipulate the process to make the money? It's human nature on some level to manipulate those things. That's what humans do. They find out what the angles are, and they begin to incorporate the angles and work the angles. And so Brian, and you'll hear during the interview, what he did is he got 500, I think it was about 500 pages of FBI investigative work that he was able to secure through the Freedom of Information Act. And the FBI has done its own investigation on pro sports, particularly football, to see if there is anything illegal taking place there. What's interesting is that the NFL, the NBA, and Major League Baseball, they have all hired ex-FBI, ex-CIA, ex-FDA people, not FDA, DEA people, to police their own sports. And who do these people have connections with? Well, they have connections with people in the agencies that they came from. So it's a lot like Washington, D.C., where you have a guy like Mike Taylor, who used to work for Monsanto, and he comes in and now he's head of the FDA. And that's how Washington works. People bounce back and forth between private industry and public service all the time. And this is what's happened with pro sports. You have guys that have been in the security industry. the investigative and the intelligence gathering industries in this country, and their industries, by the way, they're not necessarily public services, they're industries. Billions of dollars are made on intelligence and surveillance each year, and more will continue to be made over the years. And then what do? They come over and they work for the NFL or the NBA or Major League Baseball. So that's where Brian is coming from in terms of his connection to the subject matter that we're about to talk about. Where I'm coming from with this is the notion of control. And one of the things, like for instance, this week in pro sports is a quote-unquote special week because Monday is Veterans Day, and the big sport right now obviously is football, and there is an intrinsic relationship between professional football and the military, and it's been going on for years. Why? Because football is a military sport. It's modeled on conquest. What do? You take possession of other people's territory. Some of the same terms that are used in football are used in war. When a number of people rush the quarterback, what is that called? It's called a blitz. Where did they get that term from? They got it from war, because a blitz is where a group of soldiers or tanks or battalion rush a certain area, and they flood that area with armaments, personnel. They blitz, and they use the same term with football. What do you call it when a quarterback throws a very long pass? A bomb. It's a bomb. The quarterback can throw the bomb. It's a term in football. When a quarterback fires the football, really hard to a receiver, what do they call that? They call that a bullet. He just threw a bullet to that receiver. So football is loaded with war terminology, and it's all about capturing territory and demoralizing the other team. That's football. Who is the number one sponsor of pro football in the NFL? It is the Army. They spend more money than any other company or entity with pro football. Why? Because the two are interconnected. Two are linked. So all week long, there's been this run-up with teams. Well, you'll see it on Sunday. It'll be a big deal on Sunday. Flyovers. It'll be a major patriotic, meme and thrust into everybody's brains on Sunday. And what happens, especially if you look at, for instance, 9/11, we talked a little bit about this in the interview. The first team to win the Super Bowl post 9/11 was the Patriots. Is there any mistake to that? I don't think so. And so the Patriots were actually, they didn't just win the Super Bowl, but the Patriots were a dynasty in the post 9/11 era, when we are supposed to be feeling this synthetic patriotism. And trust me, there are things about this country I really love, and there are things about this country that I'm not crazy about. And one of the things that I'm not crazy about is what I would call the synthetic or false patriotism that took place in the wake of 9/11. And everybody, I'll take this back. A lot of people were moved to put flags in their yard, to put flags in their car in the post 9/11 environment. And my feelings, I'm sure you know my feelings about 9/11, it's a lie. It's an absolute and utter lie. Everything that's occurred with 9/11 and after 9/11 is based on an illusion and a lie. Okay? That's where it's at. The security industry, the military-industrial complex, all of our ventures overseas are based on a lie. It's one of the greatest lies of all time, and nobody wants to talk about it now. Nobody wants to really talk about it. If you do talk about it, what are you? You're a truther. You're a tin hatter. You're a 9/11 conspiracy theorist. You automatically get put in a ghetto. because it's enlightened to not question these things. Or put it away and move on. And what happens? Most people, well, they'll go and, they'll take their little conspiracy theory and share it with a few friends and not many other people. So what we have is the rise of patriotism, synthetic patriotism, false patriotism in the wake of 9/11. What happened with Major League Baseball? Immediately after 9/11, they started singing God Bless America, the seventh inning of every Major League Baseball game, except in Oakland, I think, or San Francisco. I think in San Francisco they honor Mao at the or Hugo Chavez. I think they honor Hugo Chavez at AT&T Park. But that's what's happened, and so the Patriots became the most popular team in the post 9/11 environment. They won 3 Super Bowls post 9/11, 3 Super Bowls, and now since then, who've they been displaced by? They've been displaced by the New York Giants. The Giants. Not Patriots, Giants. And who are the Giants? They are the giants of industry. They're the globalists. They are the elite. They are the Illuminati, the Nephilim. That's who the Giants are. And they are the ones who have been, let's take a quick roll call here. Who's won the World Series 2 out of the last 3 years? The San Francisco Giants. Who's won the Super Bowl 2 out of the last 3 years? The New York Giants. Do you see how sports reinforces social memery? This is where I'm coming from with this thing. If you get into the Kathy O'Brien material, The Transformation of America, there are 2 forms of entertainment, actually 3 if you throw in Hollywood, that she talks about, and one of them is pro sports. And she says in the book that pro sports are rigged. Now, there are people that have their issues with Kathy O'Brien, more so with her quote-unquote handler / deprogrammer. But there are things that she says in that book which I think are irrefutable. Now, one of the things she said was that if you look at who won the World Series 2 years in a row, it was the Toronto Blue Jays. Now, historically, the Toronto Blue Jays suck. Okay, they suck. They can't buy a ticket to the playoffs now. But for those 2 years, they were the best damn team in baseball. Why? Because they were stocked to the gills with the best talent. They had more money flooded to that team than any team in recent memory. Of course, now the Yankees and the Red Sox displaced them. But they won the World Series 2 years in a row. Kathy O'Brien contends that the reason they won was because they were paving the way for NAFTA. That we were getting used to Canada as being part of the North American consciousness. And that it was important for the Blue Jays to win those World Series. She also talks about Tommy Lasorda. And if you know anything about Kathy O'Brien, you will understand that she was a mind-controlled sex slave. And Kathy, there were people that had triggers and codes to her. And Tommy Lasorda was one of those people. She talks about him in the book. And then she talked about Nolan Ryan, which I thought was interesting. And she mentioned Nolan Ryan as being a banker. And what happened to Nolan Ryan now owns the Texas Rangers. Okay? And he got the Texas Rangers without a lot of his own money. He had other people to invest their money in him and the Texas Rangers. Nolan Ryan also happens to be a Freemason, by the way. That's not a secret. It's online. You can find it. I'm not divulging anything that's not known. Cal Ripken Jr. also happens to be a Freemason. Baseball happens to be a Freemasonic sport. It's based on the circle and the compass in the circle. If you look at the baseball field, I've talked about this before, the mathematics in baseball are all based on Pythagorean geometry, Euclidean geometry, Pythagorean geometry. The magic of numbers. It's all in baseball. You can find it there. 9s predominate, 6s predominate, 3s and 4s, 7s. There's 9 innings. 3 balls plus 4 strikes equals 7. 7 and 9 are sacred numbers. 90 feet, 9 between each base. The pitcher's mound, 60 feet, 0.6 inches. Why 6 inches? Why 6 inches? You add 6 and 6 together, you get 12. 1 plus 2 is 3. 3 strikes. Again, Trinity, Father, Son, Holy Ghost. Baseball is a Freemasonic sport. So what are we talking about here? We're talking about sports now as the theater of the mind and the theater of distraction for most of our culture. And because football is taking such a prominent place, it also is the breeding ground for young soldiers, thanks to the Army and their endless amount of money that they pump into the NFL. They do other sports too, like NASCAR. I think they actually have a car in NASCAR. Sports is a distraction. It is a distraction. And look, and I love sports too. I play baseball with my kid, and I throw the football around with him, and I've seen wonderful things happen with sports. You can learn about things like teamwork and synergy and overcoming adversity and moving on to the next piece in your life without being dragged down by the moment, because if you're going to be successful in sports, you almost have, sports breeds its own form of sociopathy. Because one of the things that sports does not allow an individual to do is reflect. Because if you reflect, you'll get bogged down by emotion. If you get bogged down by emotion, your performance will suffer. Reflection is great for artists and thinkers and philosophers and poets, not great for sports. You can reflect for a moment, and then you got to move on, because there's the next play. But there's something to that. There is something to that. The ability to get up and get to the next moment and embrace the next moment as if it's new. And you find a lot of that in sports. So there are things that we can learn, obviously, and yet it has become a vector for control in our society. And that's where I come from with sports. And there's a lot more to it than just that. There's a lot of other things too. But that's where I come from. It's a vector of control, but not without some merit. Okay, so here's what I'm going to do now. I'm going to play the interview with Brian, and we're going to talk about some of these things. And he's got a lot of great information, especially on the numbers side with sports. We're going to talk mostly about football. There's some baseball talk, some NBA talk, but mostly about football, because that's where he does a lot of his research and work on. He's coming out with a new book too as well, hopefully in the next year or so. So, and his website is thefixesin.net. You can find that link on the show page. All right, so here is me and Brian from yesterday, and the interview's an hour long, so I'll be back after the interview's over, share a few more thoughts with you, maybe talk a little bit about the election, then transition off to the weekend. All right, this is myself and Brian Tui, the author of The Fix Is In. I'll see you in 58 minutes and 9 seconds. Okay, so my first and probably only guest today is Brian Tui. He is the author of The Fix Is In, and it's a pretty interesting and fairly controversial look at professional sports and how professional sports are fixed, for lack of a better term. Brian, thanks for coming on the show today, and we really want to welcome you, and I'm looking forward to getting into this topic with you. When did you first get the bug to sort of get into this whole notion that professional sports might be fixed? Were you like a fan that got upset one day watching a game, or where did this come from?
Yeah, it started out as being a fan who just, I stopped believing the leagues were telling me the truth. And I stopped believing they were telling me the truth because I knew they were lying to me. I knew they were lying to me about gambling going on around the game. I knew they were lying to me about steroids and drugs in the game. And I knew that they have the ability to control the games, or at least everything outside the game itself. So why wouldn't they be able to control the game, which is the product that they sell? And I really had this idea probably 10, 12 years ago. because I wrote an article for a magazine that was called Paranoia about how I thought the NFL may be fixing their own games for higher TV ratings, greater fan interest, and all the profit that went along with it. And that slowly evolved into the book, The Fix Is In, which came out in 2010. And really for the past 6 years, I've been investigating this kind of stuff pretty much nonstop.
Was there a specific game that you watched and said, this is it, this is the game, this breaks it for me?
The tipping point might have been when the Patriots won the Super Bowl after 9/11. And a lot of people pointed that out, that it's kind of an odd coincidence that out of all the teams that potentially could win after that tragedy, it happened to be a team with the named Patriots that won. And in the fashion they won, I mean, the game itself was highly suspect. And if, as more time has gone on, we've learned that the Patriots most likely did videotape. They were cheating through the whole Spygate scandal as it was. And the very start of it might have been that year, that season, and they might have been taping what the Rams are doing at the walkthrough before that Super Bowl game. And as you watch the game, and you can watch it, bits and pieces on YouTube, you could see that the referees clearly were not calling penalties that they should have against the Patriots on the Rams receivers. They were holding them. They were, pass interference calls that should have been made that weren't made. And it very much seemed like the league was pushing the Patriots into the Super Bowl and then to win it. Right,
exactly. And then you had a coach in Mike Martz who was pretty stubborn, and clearly the key to that game was running the football. And he didn't run the football for whatever reason. It was a very odd game and really thrust the Patriots onto the national limelight. How soon after Bob Kraft bought the Patriots did that franchise turn around?
Yeah, I don't remember what year he purchased it, to be honest. I'm not sure. But it's amazing how fast Bob Kraft became one of the premier owners in the NFL. And his background is, oddly enough, in television. I mean, he was, I forget, was he president of Viacom or something? He worked at Viacom, which is affiliated with CBS, and of course CBS is a broadcast partner of the NFL, and the NFL, today makes nearly $6 billion a year just from television revenue alone, which basically funds the league. I mean, it's more than 60% of all the revenue the league takes in, which is shared equally among the teams. So, I mean, I think it's very odd that Bob Kraft got this sort of power very quickly within the NFL, and that at the same time his team rose right to the top.
Yeah, because I remember they had Victor Kiam, who he bought the Patriots from, and they struggled for quite a long time, and it didn't take the Patriots very long to turn the corner. So Kraft comes from TV, is what you're saying?
Yeah, that was one of his background areas for sure. And in fact, today you see, it's interesting. If you watch games, CBS will sometimes show him sitting in his owner's box with the president of CBS.
Is that Les Moonves? Is that who that is?
Yeah, exactly. And then at the same time, they have like joint ventures at the Patriots Stadium. They have a joint venture restaurant there. Kraft is supposedly in the works to build a casino right by there as well. He's a connected guy, and he's connected to CBS, and it's all a real incestuous relationship between them.
Interesting. So $6 billion a year from TV revenue alone. What about ticket sales? What about merchandise? What does that add up to?
Altogether, the NFL makes nearly $10 billion a season.
Have you lined that up with like the GNP for third world countries?
No, but I do find it interesting that of the four major sports leagues now, of course, the NHL right now isn't operating because they're locked out, but at the NFL, NBA, NHL, and Major League Baseball combined last year made nearly, I think, $25 billion for that season, which is a huge amount of money. Then you think outside of that, how much money did the networks who broadcast those games make? How much did Nike and Adidas and Reebok make off of that?
Right.
All these other companies that are profiting basically on the back of professional sports. It means a lot of money to a lot of people. And the thing that I get into, hopefully with the next book that will come out in 2013, is even though that's a lot of money, that $25 billion, the last time an estimate was made on illegal sports gambling in the United States, which was 1999, it said that anywhere from $80 to $380 billion is wagered illegally on sports.
300 illegally?
Illegally. So $80 to $380 billion. So if you take the low end, the $80 billion, it's nearly 4 times as much money than the leagues are making.
And so what is the legal amount that's wagered?
the legal amount, which is basically what's wagered in Nevada or Las Vegas, is usually referred to, is less than $3 billion a season.
Less than 3.
Yeah.
And then you've got the illegal number. Those are staggering amounts of money.
Oh, exactly. And then people tell me, well, you can't fix a game. A mobster or a gambler couldn't fix the game. Well, if it's $80 billion, which dwarfs the amount of money all the leagues are making combined, and these people can pump millions of dollars into that marketplace, which is completely unregulated. It's just a free-for-all.
Mm-hmm.
No one's watching it. No one's monitoring it. Well, you could very easily fix the game because you could offer a player, hundreds of thousands of dollars for a game if you had the access and want to do it,
mm-hmm.
and that millions of dollars into this illegal sports market, and nobody would see anything going on. And nobody's looking for it, which is even scarier, if you ask me.
Well, getting back to the Patriots, and this is kind of the Rosetta Stone for your investigation, there was a ruling that came through during the Spygate scandal. For people that don't know about Spygate, do you want to break Spygate down and then talk about what came out of that with the ruling with the judge?
Sure. The Spygate scandal was essentially that New England Patriots were caught videotaping their opponent's coaching signals, and the notion was that they were doing this because at halftime they would go in, watch the tapes, and then realize what the signals were and be able to better predict what the opposing defense was doing. So they were cheating.
Mm-hmm.
In the basic term, they were basically cheating, and they got caught doing so. And what happened was it happened during the Jets-Patriots game. A fan of the New York Jets, who happened to be a lawyer associated with Ralph Nader, of all people, sued. And he sued on behalf of Jets fans, and he wanted basically 10 years' worth of restitution of those tickets that were sold, saying that the Patriots were cheating and get away with it. Well, the case went all the way up to the Third Circuit Court of Appeals, and there the Jets fan lost. And the ruling that came out of it by the judges basically stipulated that said, when you buy a ticket to an NFL game or any sporting event, it's for entertainment purposes only, and your ticket only gives you a license by the team to see a game. So if you buy a license to see that game, all they have to do is provide a game.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't mean it has to be played under any certain rules, doesn't mean any certain players have to be out there or perform to their best of abilities, doesn't mean the team can't cheat, doesn't mean the game can't be fixed. You paid to see a game, you saw a game, that's the end of the story. Mm-hmm. That's all the leagues have to give to you is the game you purchased to see. So basically, there are no laws that prevent the league from fixing their own game. The closest it ever came to is potentially suing a league for fraud, and this case basically proved the fact that it's not fraud if they're fixing their own games as well.
Interesting. One of the I listen to a lot of sports talk radio, and one of the things that inevitably a talking head on the radio or on TV will circle around, especially regarding a controversial ruling or play or penalty, is that they are eager to dismiss any type of conspiracy. I mean, almost to a T, they're almost insulted when you bring up this notion. Have you encountered this with, these sort of syndicated sports talk, talking head types? Both personally from your book and also just listening to the kind of the ambient chatter when this stuff comes up.
Well, I've been censored. I mean, flat out censored by sports media outlets.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I know that, and I can essentially prove it. I mean, they haven't censored what I say, but they'll censor me by not having me on.
Mm-hmm.
They won't have me on to discuss this thing or to debate it. I mean, it's interesting because, they could easily have me on, and if they wanted to, make me look like a fool, they could attack me and dump all this stuff on me, and, we could have a debate. But at the same time, I don't think they want me out there discussing this sort of subject matter. I don't think they want me to get fans thinking about this going on. But, there's been basically from the corporate end of ESPN, which controls, like, the major ESPN outlets in Chicago, New York, Los Angeles, Boston, and Dallas. I've been on a lot of smaller ESPN affiliates, but those major ones won't have me on.
Mm-hmm.
And there's been major sports radio programs that agreed to have me on that I sent, like a copy of my book to review, and then they turned around and, for their own reasons, said, oh, well, we decided not to have you on. We can't have you on, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And they've done it. They've just flat out said, we're not going to talk about this subject matter.
Yeah.
I think it's scary because if they can do it to me, and I'm just talking about sports, who else can they do it to? How many other whistleblowers and stuff can they keep silent just by not having them on the air?
Well, the problem is that the number of media outlets over the last 20 years has shrunk, and there's 8 now. So,
I mean, because in the sports world, especially, there's ESPN, there's Sports Illustrated, maybe Fox Sports. Now, Sporting News kind of has a radio outlet, and they're affiliated, I think, with Yahoo Sports. But beyond that, that's it.
Yeah.
There's no other place. I mean, if I wanted to try to write, investigative articles in the sporting world, who would publish them?
Right.
Well, besides Sports Illustrated, well, nobody.
Right. And ESPN is owned by Disney.
Exactly.
And we all know that Disney is in the business of creating fiction and offering up all kinds of programming, both overtly and covertly. Let's talk a little more about football. Let's get into this whole replacement ref thing that happened earlier this year, which I thought was really fascinating on a number of levels. But one of the things that came through on the replacement ref front was a margin of error that was enormous over those first, 3 weeks?
3 games,
yeah. Yeah. And over those 3 weeks, every team was playing. The bye weeks hadn't kicked in yet. So you had every team playing over the course of 3 weeks with this randomness and this chaos sort of built in. What was your take on the whole? First of all, what was your take on the whole replacement ref thing? And then what was your take on it as it relates to actually fixing games? Because that's when you could actually fix a lot of games in a really short period of time.
I found it interesting that one of the NFL's arguments, right now, the NFL and all the professional sports leagues are suing the state of New Jersey to keep sports gambling illegal.
Mm-hmm.
And one of their main arguments, and this has been their main argument for literally 30 years, is they're out to protect the integrity of their sport. Well, clearly the replacement refs were not protecting the integrity of the NFL in any way, shape, or form, and the NFL didn't care.
Right.
So really that integrity argument, and there's other ways you could attack their integrity argument, but that's one way that shows that, this integrity thing is just basically to sell tickets and keep people interested. It's not a true want of integrity within the league. But the interesting thing is one of the ways if a league wanted to fix its own games is to do it through the referees.
Right.
Because it's not illegal that way. Because if I own the league and I say to my employees who are the referees, hey, I want you to call a certain game in a certain way, I don't want to, and this goes for any league, not the NFL, but the NBA and the NHL as well. We want you to give Kobe Bryant and LeBron James more room to work. Call tighter penalties for anybody who's guarding them, but lighten up on the penalties for them.
Right.
We want you to and let the league become more of a passing league in the NFL, so don't call as many offensive holding calls, so the guys have more chance to pass, but call more defensive pass interference calls, so these guys back up the wide receivers. These are all ways of manipulating the game, and it's also ways of manipulating outcomes.
Right.
And I don't think people think of it that way. I don't think they look at it in that fashion, but they should. Because it's happening right in front of you, and you can prove it because you see it every week, and yet nobody raises the flag because nobody can attack the referees, for one. If a player or coach, says, we got jobbed in this game or that game, they instantly get fined.
Right.
And nobody wants to get fined for speaking their mind, but they do. It's not freedom of speech in the NFL or the NBA. Right. And then after the game, you can't interview the referees if you're a member of the media. So you can't ask them, why did you make that call? The big controversial call Monday Night Football between the Packers and the Seahawks.
Yeah.
In the end zone. Well, nobody could question the officials. Why did they make the call? Why was this decision made? Why does the replay booth, enforce it? Nobody could ask any of those questions. So instead, there's just all this controversy surrounding it. But the fact is, the NFL doesn't care because it got people interested. Bad press is just as good as good press.
Let's talk about that game for a moment, because from a fixing standpoint, that's a very interesting game. The score was, Green Bay was favored by, 6.5 in that game?
Something like that, I believe, yeah.
I think it was 6.5. And the game was quite close. And it got down to the end of the game, and particularly when, Green Bay I didn't see the game, I was watching it kind of on a game cast, and it was kind of confusing to watch on the game cast, but Green Bay had the ball, and they had the ball with, I think, a little bit less than 2 minutes left to play, but they could not convert a first down.
Yep.
So they had to give the ball back to the Seahawks. And that's when everything starts to kind of go full tilt boogie, because there are a number of penalties that were either called or not called during that drive, right?
Yeah.
Which essentially sets up the last second play, the throw into the end zone with Golden Tate and the defensive back from the Green Bay Packers. And I saw it replayed a number of times. It's the most bizarre thing I've ever seen, in that the ball is thrown and it is clearly an interception.
Yeah.
And you have one referee signaling touchback. You have another referee signaling touchdown. And they're both watching the same play.
Yeah.
And it seemed to me that play, that the Seahawks were going to score that touchdown no matter what. The only thing that was not going to, and in fact, even if Russell Wilson had thrown the ball out of the end zone, they would have called a pass interference, I'm sure, to extend that play. That was the most blatant and egregious act of manipulating the outcome of a game. And then conveniently, that referee is gone after that game. He's not going to work again as a professional referee. And the old refs come back on Sunday. And the whole thing kind of goes away. What was the money? How much money moved in that game? That's really the big question.
Well, the estimates were, I've heard, as much as $250 million.
Okay.
Was the swing between the Packers winning and then the Seahawks winning based off the point spread of the gambling. But honestly, I mean, I don't think anybody really knows.
Right.
Because, I mean, they say anywhere from $1 billion to $4 billion is wagered on NFL games illegally every week. So who knows really how much? And even I think in the sports books, I don't think they really know in the legal sports books how much money that swayed. But it clearly swayed a significant amount of money, and it swayed it in the favor of the Las Vegas sports books.
Interesting.
But yeah, you're right. In that game, it almost, because I did watch the game, especially the end, and it was like the referees willed the Seahawks to score.
Yeah.
Like, did whatever they needed to do to get them downfield and get them in that position, and then rule what they ruled to create a touchdown.
And of course, they have the most perfect excuse, right? And that they're these really incompetent replacement refs.
Well, yeah, it's great. And the thing that I even find more frightening in a sense is now, again, as you said, the replacement refs were gone as soon as it was over, and the real refs came back. Well, now the real refs can't be questioned.
Right.
Because instantly the league will go, well, would you want the replacement refs back?
Right.
No, these are our real refs. These are the guys who know how the game is called, the way the game's supposed to be played, blah, blah, blah. And, it's ridiculous because the real refs make just as many, if not more, mistakes than the replacement refs did.
Right. In fact,
but they're more controlled by the league. They know what the league wants and how the league wants things to run. I mean, there was complaints that the replacement refs were calling too many penalties and making games last too long.
Right.
We weren't complaining that the guys were necessarily making wrong penalty calls, just that they were making too many penalty calls.
Yeah.
Which is one of my biggest arguments and problems with fans is, if you watch a football game and they say holding can be called on every play. Well, it's just for the sake of argument's sake, okay, that's, an exaggeration, but it can be called every fourth play.
Mm-hmm.
Well, how do you justify the fact that 15 times holding occurred and no one called a penalty, but the 16th time someone did call a penalty?
Right.
If you have a rule book that says this is what a penalty is, this is how it should be enforced, and 15 of the 16 times it's not enforced that way, well, something's going on.
Right.
And I mean, that's a manipulation of the game, and that's something I think fans should worry about.
Absolutely. So when we think about gambling in pro sports, and we think about underworld types, right? I mean, that they would be the ones that would move the line, maybe make the money. What about more sort of institutionalized money players like Goldman Sachs? Why wouldn't Goldman Sachs get in on, I mean, they fix other markets, right? Why wouldn't they get in on a Monday Night Football game where the point spread swings that quickly. I mean, have you thought along these lines as well?
No, because this sort of thing is harder to prove and show connections to.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, especially when it's all done in the illegal market as it is. I mean, and it's interesting because I have interviewed professional sports gamblers and I've interviewed bookmakers as well. And all the things that they say are like indications of a fixed game. Things like what they call unnatural money showing up on one side, where huge bets show up like really late on one side of a game as opposed to another. Or, line movements that are over and above beyond the norm. They say these are indications that something might be going on in regards to a game. But the fact is that happens all the time.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it literally happens almost every week. So perhaps, a ton of games are being fixed, or perhaps these are bad indicators of what a fixed game is. But the guys I've spoke to who do this for a living, who do this for a profession, they can actually manipulate the markets globally. They can manipulate the betting line globally by starting by betting in the Far East, where sports gambling is illegal as well, but those line movements move to Europe, and they move the lines there, and then those European line movements move to the offshore sports books, which then move to the legal sports books and illegal bookies in the United States. And by making a bet in Japan, they can influence the market all the way around the world back into the United States.
Interesting.
And oftentimes these guys talk about the number on a game as if it was like a number in the stock market. Mm-hmm. They don't really talk about, the Patriots or the Browns or the Bears or the Packers. They care about the number, and they care a lot of times about how the number's moving and how it's manipulated. Again, it sounds a lot more like the stock market than it does sports.
Right. And if they can get the number moving in their direction, even with a basic working knowledge of some of the dynamics and variance in any game, then that's what they want, right?
Yeah, well, and the real big-time sports gamblers, when they manipulate the number, sometimes they'll manipulate it by intentionally even losing money, which I don't think people quite grasp, is that they will bet literally, tens of hundreds of $1,000s on a team they think isn't going to win.
Mm-hmm.
In order to manipulate the line in favor of the team they want to bet on, and then bet even more money on that opposite side.
That makes total sense. I could totally see that.
But that's how they can do this on a worldwide scale.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, it's not something that, the average bettor can even understand or necessarily even, be a part of, but yet they are actually still being manipulated by these few guys who can do this sort of thing.
Yeah. Let's go back to a game last year that had a kind of a personal interest for me. It was the NFC Championship game, Giants versus the 49ers, and there is a fumble that occurred with Ahmad Bradshaw, and clearly it was a fumble, and the 49ers have recovered the fumble. And you talk about this on your site, but there were two calls that were made simultaneously on that play, right?
You have to remind me. I think so.
There was one that said there was forward progress, and the other that said there was a fumble.
Oh, okay.
And then they ruled in favor of forward progress because the 49ers would have had the ball inside the Giants' territory, and they would have kicked probably a field goal and likely had won that game. But that call in and of itself was a game changer. And the other thing too about that game is that the 49er receivers, with the exception of Vernon Davis, who's a tight end, they only had one pass thrown to them, which says to me that the Giants' defensive backs were mugging their receivers the entire game. What was your take on that game?
Well, it's one of those instances like the call you brought up with Ahmad Bradshaw, where fans at home can see clearly that the referees are wrong. And the referees, if they go to instant replay, should themselves be able to see that they're wrong, and they don't change the call.
Mm-hmm.
And, I mean, you see this in other games. I mean, I think 2 weeks earlier when the Giants played the Packers, where Greg Jennings caught a pass and then fumbled, but yet it was ruled that he was down when, everybody – I was in a room with 30 Packer fans, and they were like, oh, boy, we fumbled the ball.
Right.
He clearly fumbled the ball. But going to instant replay, they said, well, no, that's not a fumble, and they gave the ball back to the Packers.
Yeah, that was really blatant. I was was really surprised at that call, to be honest.
Well, and that's the thing, is, I mean, they can manipulate these games literally right in front of you and get away with it. Because there's no oversight, there's nobody who can, enforce what's proper and correct within these games.
Mm-hmm.
Because then you've seen it in other games too, where they rule a guy as out of bounds, and you look and see an inch of grass on the instant replay of green grass between his foot and the sidelines, and yet they still rule him out of bounds for whatever reason. I mean, we see this happen almost every week,
mm-hmm.
and the league can get away with it. And this is again a way I think they can manipulate games and get the results they want. Because I think they were happier, perhaps, having the Giants play the Patriots in the Super Bowl rematch than they would have had having the 49ers in the Super Bowl game.
I would totally agree with that.
And the 49ers didn't win because they had already gotten their rights to their new stadium, which is what they really needed. So
right.
They just needed to be successful enough to get the voters to agree to spending hundreds of millions of dollars on a stadium they really probably don't even need.
Well, I would say that I've been to Candlestick Park. Trust me, they need a new stadium.
Have you ever been to Wrigley Field?
I have not been to Wrigley Field. Yeah, but that's a whole different issue. But I'll tell you right now, Candlestick Park is an absolute dump, and it should never have been built in the first place. One of the guys you talk about on your website is Mike Pereira, who is he's an ex-NFL official, and he works for, is it NBC? Is that who he works for?
No, he is on Fox.
Fox. So his role, for people who don't watch these shows, he's an ex-referee, and when there's a questionable call, they bring him immediately onto the broadcast, and I've seen him a number of times, and every time they bring him on, he's always backing up the referee's call on the field. Yep. I've never seen him say, that's a really bad call, he screwed up, the other team should have the ball.
I think he actually did during the replacement rest times.
Well, okay.
Which, I mean, would be an obvious reason for him, an incentive for him to do that.
Right.
But, for the most part, he's always, you can almost tell sometimes where he doesn't even mean it. Even he sometimes looks at some of these calls questionably, but he's able to make the wording sound where, the referee was in the right to make this call because of this reason or that reason.
Mm-hmm. And,
he does seem to be towing the corporate lines.
He's a gatekeeper. That's what he is.
Yeah.
He's there to reinforce the fact that there is really the rule of law in football and everything's on the up and up. What about the coaches and the players? I mean, where are their heads at with this stuff? How many do you think know that this thing is rigged? And if they don't, I mean, what's their level of denial? I mean, what's your take on their role in all this?
Well, I think they could easily be directly involved.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think you can. I think if anything, history's proven that you can get to anybody.
Sure.
I mean, the mafia has proven that. You find the weak point of somebody, and you make them do what you want. The maf's done it for decades.
Right.
And I think the NFL, the NBA, any of these leagues can do the exact same thing. I mean, you just take drug testing, for example. The leagues completely control drug testing. They determine what's an illegal drug, when players get tested, how they're tested, who collects the samples, who tests the samples, and then the league gets the results.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it would be very easy for the league to go to whoever, starting quarterback of a team, and say, hey, we just tested you. You tested positive for cocaine.
Mm-hmm.
So we can do one of two things. We can either out you as a cocaine addict, we can, suspend you and do all these negative things to you in the press, or, maybe Sunday you just don't play so well.
So they put the muscle on the players, and the players say, okay, right, I get it.
I think that's the way of doing it. I mean, I think there's other ways. Again, the mob and gamblers can do this just as easily. I mean, how many, and it doesn't matter to me, but how many blatantly or known homosexual athletes are there in any sporting league? I mean, I don't think you could name one in any of the four major sports.
Very few. Very few.
You can name one. I don't think there's one that's been publicly outed as known as being a homosexual.
It's usually after they leave the game.
Yeah, exactly, after they leave the sport. So if you wanted to go out and get pictures of him doing something remotely associated with that, I think, again, it'd be a very easy way of blackmailing somebody into doing something. But at the same time, I think a player like Peyton Manning or Tom Brady, who's been around long enough,
mm-hmm.
who knows how the game is played,
mm-hmm.
I think, it'd be very easy to approach them, too, and say, hey, look, we might need this game to go this way or this game to go that way. Same with certain coaches. Why do certain coaches who have a terrible, horrific coaching record continue to get jobs in these leagues?
Well, that's a great question.
Coaching these games?
That is like, why does Romeo Crennel still have a job?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of guys who just kick around. They go from being an assistant coach to a head coach to an assistant coach to a head coach to a college coach back to the pros.
Yeah.
And they've proven themselves not exactly good at their job, but yet they keep getting employed at supposedly the top level that there is in this country. And I think it could very well be that, again, they know how the game is played, and that certain times, certain teams need to win.
One of the things that as I've sort of done my research on this a little bit in my own way, one of the things that I found as kind of a thread in baseball, in particular, is Freemasonry, and there are people like Nolan Ryan and Cal Ripken. Both are bona fide Freemasons, and I often thought that if you wanted to have a group of individuals control a game, you would have like a kind of a subsect or an organization within an organization to be a part of that game. Have you ever seen any links between Freemasonry and the NFL referees?
I've never researched it. I've had it brought up to me before, but it's nothing I've ever dug into.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's very, possible. I think it's very possible, like you say, to have a cult within a section that could, be dictating how things are run. Sure.
Yeah, and especially since
it's
they have to.
It's not on the realm of possibility, that's for sure.
Especially since they have to be able to keep secrets too. I mean, that would be the ideal thing.
Well, and the thing is, a lot of people ask me, how would this be kept secret? And I think the biggest thing to ask yourself is, well, what proof would you have? Say you were a legitimate player who, however they got you, were a referee, and you fixed, last week's game. What are you going to do? I mean, how are you going to prove that happened? You go out to the, major media, hold the press conference and say, I fixed, this game last week because of this reason. And they're going to say, well, everybody's going to line up against you in the leagues.
Sure.
Workers, your players, coaches, everybody's going to say, well, no, you didn't do it. And then they're going to say, well, what proof do you have? And you don't have any proof.
No, there'd be no paper trail or something like that.
No, exactly. So, because people say, well, somebody would talk, this would come out, somebody would write a book and make $1 million off it. Well, none of that's true. Right. All that's insane.
Right.
Because there is no proof. And I've gotten literally over 400 files from the FBI relating to sports bribery, which is game fixing, basically, by the mob or gamblers. And the FBI couldn't prove these things because they had the same problem. There was no concrete evidence. You could look at all the game film you want and say this guy had a bad game here and this guy had a bad game here, and that's happened to be the way these gamblers bet on these games. But guess what? Everybody has a bad game. Mm-hmm. So prove that he did it on purpose, that he had a bad game on purpose as opposed to just having a bad day. He can't.
Right. What about college football? Have you crunched the numbers with college football in terms of gambling?
No, I don't know the actual stats on how it's done on college, but college is an easier game to fix than the pros.
Mm-hmm.
Because the athletes, the kids don't get paid.
Right.
And I mean, it would be very easy in college basketball or college football to approach anyone who, is on the cusp maybe of being drafted or maybe might be good enough to play in the NFL but probably won't, and say, look, this is your last season, you're a senior, you're not going to be drafted, you're not going to play in the bigs, well, how about you make $10,000 a game for me by throwing these games?
Mm-hmm.
And how many kids would pass up that opportunity to make, $100,000 perhaps playing college football that's not taxed, that nobody monitors,
mm-hmm.
and just by, maybe not covering the point spread. You don't even have to lose, just don't cover.
Right. You talked a little bit about steroids and drug testing. There was a guy. His name always escapes my mind, but he was here in Texas. He was in Dallas, and he had been arrested for the distribution of steroids, and he had been linked to some Cowboy players. And there was some talk that he was part of a much bigger operation. And I think within about 6 weeks after his arraignment, he was found dead in his apartment along with his girlfriend. You know what I'm talking about?
I remember the case, but I don't remember the name either.
So how big of a problem do you think steroids is in pro football right now?
Oh, I'm sure it's rampant. It has to be. I mean, I radio show with a member of the Pro Football Writers of America. He hosted a local ESPN radio show in Florida. And he told me on the air, he said 75% of NFL players, at least 75%, are using human growth hormone, HGH.
Right.
Which, at the time, this was probably, I think, in 2011, it wasn't one of the substances that was banned by the league. But it's clearly a steroid. It's clearly a performance-enhancing drug. And at least 75% of the league was on it, according to this guy. And he's a guy who should know. And I've heard from former players, none who will go on the record, but I've heard from guys who say that the doctors, the team doctors, basically prescribe steroids to them and tell them how to take them and how to not be caught during drug testing.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's not necessarily the steroids that make them stronger or faster, it's the recuperative power.
Recovery time.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And it aids in, in this day and age of guys, blowing out knees and shoulders and that, and getting them back out in the field. I mean, look at Adrian Peterson. He blew out his knee last year, and 8 months later, right now, he's one of the best running backs again in the NFL.
Right.
Which, medically speaking, shouldn't be possible unless he's doing something he shouldn't be.
Yeah. Yeah, or he's getting some sort of stem cell replacement, or,
Yeah, something more is perhaps going on, but not to single him out by any means, but there's, I think, in every sport, I think baseball's not as clean as they claim to be. I mean, right now, I think this past season, I think it was 101 minor league players were busted for performance-enhancing drugs.
That's a big number.
And that's a lot of guys who are trying to make the professional level. So how many guys on the professional level are trying to stay in the professional level?
Yeah.
If they're trying to stay there, what are they doing to stay there? It can't just be taking batting practice and fielding ground balls. It's got to be something over and above that. And there's plenty of substances that the leagues aren't testing for, and these chemists are cooking up that they can't test for.
That's right. Yeah, yeah. And the other thing too with baseball, I know baseball, based on the schedule alone, 162 games.
Yep.
It's a really demanding schedule, and a lot of these guys in pro baseball either use Benzedrine or Adderall, which is a kind of their drug of choice now. Speed is very, very prevalent in baseball because you just have to stay up for the season. What about? Let's talk a little bit about basketball. I have essentially stopped watching the NBA because I mean football. I mean, you made a great point about on your site about the New Orleans San Francisco game where Drew Brees threw 60 passes in that game, and there was not one penalty called.
Yeah.
And yet the 49ers, because they were able to turn the ball over, somehow managed to kind of neutralize that and win that game. So there's still kind of a layer in football where there can be some randomness and chaos and teams can win games. I don't find that at all in the NBA. I think the NBA is the most canned sport that we're watching now, and it's canned from the draft with the lottery, which is not transparent. Nobody sees that. And then you've got, in the NBA draft, you have the worst team not always getting the top pick, and that top pick is like gold. So there's manipulation going into the building of the teams. I'm from the Bay Area. Larry Ellison, clearly one of the richest men in the world, got railroaded by David Stern and a local ownership group that could not buy the Warriors. Why? Because he would have shifted the balance of power in the NBA. He would have had too much money. David Stern didn't want to let him play. So there's all of these machinations which go into controlling the league itself. And then there's the games with the referees. Tell us some of the things that you've found with the NBA that's really just kind of incongruent and leads to this notion that these games are fixed in the NBA.
I think one of the interesting things for me was just a few years ago they had, I think it was the Cavaliers played the Spurs in the finals.
Mm-hmm.
It was about, 4 years ago, I think?
Yeah. And
LeBron was in the finals, and it was like one of the lowest rated finals in recent memory. I mean, the ratings for the NBA over the past 3-4 years leading up to the finals had been getting lower and worse with each passing year. And then they had the lowest rated finals there. And at the end of that season, the NBA still managed to sign their most lucrative television deal ever, where they get nearly $1 billion a season, oddly enough, from ABC, ESPN, Disney, that whole conglomerate.
Right.
And in the very next year, you had the Celtics play the Lakers in the finals, and revenue and ratings and everything were up like 50% instantly, overnight.
Right.
So that. And I'm supposed to just believe that's a coincidence.
Yeah.
You know, you're tanking, and somehow, you know, it even goes against business sense. It's, you know, the ratings are getting worse, yet the TV companies are willing to spend more on that product, and then suddenly they have a rebound that just happened to be featuring the two most storied franchises in the league. And ever since then, everything's been kind of on the up and the up for the league. And I just don't find that to be coincidence. I don't think you can just have the ball bounce that way.
Mm-hmm.
Like, say, and it's very easy to manipulate an NBA game, especially through the referees.
Yeah.
Because you can take a player out by calling certain fouls. You can give more players room to operate by not calling certain fouls.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a very easy thing to do.
Yeah. It's one of the. I think the NBA is one of the easiest sports to fix from a referee level. The other sport too that I think is also easy to fix is baseball with the home plate umpire in the strike zone. And that is, I'm an A's fan, and I watched the Detroit Tigers play the A's, and Justin Verlander had about a 2-foot strike zone.
Yeah.
And made it virtually impossible for the A's to be able to do anything against him. And for me, it was clear that Major League Baseball was not interested in having the A's go any further than those 5 games. Nice little story. Thanks for playing.
Yeah, well, I think that's another thing that, again, baseball fans don't necessarily look at is the fact that a home plate umpire can put so much pressure on a team or take pressure off a team just by calling balls and strikes.
Yeah.
I mean, granted, they can't stop, you know, a bad pitch from going over the heart of the plate and the guy hitting the ball out of the ballpark. They can't stop that. But, you know, a borderline first pitch that could be a ball, could be a strike. Well, if a home plate umpire decides he wants to put pressure on the pitcher, he can call it a ball. If he wants to put pressure on the hitter, he can call it a strike. And instantly the at-bat will change.
Yeah.
And you do that enough, and you do that enough during an at-bat or through the course of the game, and, yeah, you can make things go the way you kind of want them to go.
Mm-hmm.
You can't guarantee it as much as you could perhaps in the NBA or the NFL, but it can be done.
Right. You mentioned Tim Donaghy while we were setting this up and just chatting a little bit. Have you ever met him?
You know, I emailed him, and we did an interview over email.
Mm-hmm.
I never talked to him personally, no.
What was your take on him?
From his email responses, honestly, he was kind of a jerk.
Mm-hmm.
Best I could put it. I mean, he was really kind of short and curt, and he wasn't very open, and I don't believe he was really very honest in some of the responses he gave me.
For people that don't know who Tim Donaghy is, he's the only ref that was caught in a betting scandal. And I say caught, only one caught. There were others, I'm sure. But he was actually working with mobsters. He wasn't really working for the league to fix outcomes of games. That's a whole different notion of fixing games. He was fixing games because there was pressure being put on him from the outside, right?
No, there was no pressure. He did it himself.
He did it himself. Wasn't it after a while? I mean, that's his story, that after a while he couldn't get out, though, right?
No. Well, that's his story, but it wasn't true.
Okay.
From all intents and purposes, he was doing it himself, and that's one thing. Any of these athletes or referees could be doing that, and that's one thing people I don't think realize either is that, you know, a greedy athlete could go out there and fix games without having some outside influence.
Mm-hmm.
They could just want more money.
Right.
And I mean, that's like Paul Horning and, you know, Alex Karras got suspended from the NFL in 1963 for gambling on their own sport, but they weren't necessarily fixing games. They were just trying to make more money by gambling on them.
Right.
But that's what Donaghy was doing, and Donaghy wasn't really the brightest guy in doing it because the guy he was betting with, or betting through, I should say, this bookie, Batista, he was going out and betting literally millions of dollars on the games Donaghy was refereeing, and Donaghy was getting like $2,000 to $5,000 a game.
That's
for
nothing.
making like a correct call.
Right.
But the thing was, is that many people think he got busted for fixing games, and he didn't. He didn't even get arrested for fixing games. He He got in trouble basically for violating the Wire Act and providing sports gambling information across state lines.
Mm-hmm.
But he was not busted for fixing games, while anybody who's ever really investigated would say he clearly was fixing games. But neither the FBI wanted to investigate it, and the NBA did not want to investigate it because they don't want to, affect their own integrity by saying, oh, yeah, these games were rigged by this referee, and it could happen again tomorrow. Because the fact is, Tim Donaghy would still be officiating in the NBA had the FBI not hauled him off and arrested him.
Right. And then the NBA had this other little scandal going on with the refs selling their flying vouchers. What was that one about?
They were upgrading, or they were degrading. They were getting first-class tickets, trading them in for regular coach tickets and keeping the money that was made off of those ticket sales.
Right.
But I think even more important, if you go back to Donaghy, is after the whole scandal was basically over and done with from the NBA's perspective, is they did their own internal investigation, and it was issued as called the Pedowitz Report.
Right.
And these guys, these referees, they interviewed all of them. I think there's 57 of them, give or take. And they weren't under oath. They weren't presented with any evidence, but they're basically asked, are you gambling? And not necessarily on NBA games, but are you gambling in general? Because according to their collective bargaining agreement, they cannot involve themselves in any form of gambling.
Mm-hmm.
They can't lottery tickets. They can't go to the casino. They're not supposed to do any of it. And I think it was 54 to 57 told the NBA, yeah, we've been gambling. We've broken our collective bargaining agreement. And instead of the NBA, suspending these guys, fining these guys, or even outright firing these guys, David Stern came out and said, we're going to rewrite our rules to allow them to gamble.
Interesting.
And then they're worried about how, fans feel about their integrity.
Yeah.
Well, your integrity just went out the window right then and there.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, David Stern is a piece of work. I mean, that guy is an absolute, utter master manipulator on so many levels.
And that's why he's been employed so long.
Oh, yeah.
By the league, he's making the money hand over fist.
And that's the other thing, too, people don't understand. Back in the day, when baseball had a commissioner, back in the day, sound like an old fart now, the commissioner actually performed the role of almost like an independent agent.
Yeah.
You go back and you look at somebody like Bowie Kuhn or Fay Vincent. These guys didn't always have the owner's interests first. They considered them, but they were involved in upholding some form of integrity of the game. But all that has changed now, and all the commissioners are clearly just front men for the owners.
Yeah, I would agree with you wholeheartedly that it's completely changed.
Yeah.
Especially, like you say, in baseball, when they got rid of the commissioner position altogether and then brought in a former owner and form a C-League to run it, to be the commissioner.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, you look at Goodell, who was a lifetime, all he's been done has been employed by the NFL, and now he runs it as commissioner. And Stern, who's been there, almost 30 years? I mean, these guys are clearly beholden more to the owners than they are to the players, and they're going to basically do what they can to keep making those owners money. What
was your take on Bountygate? I thought Bountygate was very weird, by the way.
I thought it was a complete farce.
Yeah.
Because I think it was only I think other teams have been running bounties, and they've been doing bounties for decades.
Yeah.
And it's been going on in the NHL. They call it putting some guy's name on the board in the NHL. You go out and get that guy. And if you do, you get paid for it by the other players.
Yeah.
I think with the reason the NFL, and this is the interesting part to me, is the fact that NFL security was the entity behind this. And NFL security is, which for people who don't realize, it literally stands for former members of the FBI, CIA, DEA, Secret Service, local law enforcement. Mm-hmm. And yet I cannot find, and I've been investigating this for 6 years pretty solidly now, cannot find a single instance where real law enforcement has thanked the NFL security for revealing some sort of corruption going on with a player, coach, referee, or anything. And so what is NFL security really doing?
Interesting.
I interviewed the former head of NFL security, a man by the name of Warren Welsh, and I spoke to him for an hour on the phone, and when I got off the phone with him, I still didn't know what NFL security did.
Interesting.
Yeah, so now here's suddenly NFL security outs this whole bounty scandal but I think it was done at the NFL's behest. I think they picked on the Saints intentionally because the Saints had just won the Super Bowl, which I think was given to them by the league because they were profiting after Hurricane Katrina.
Right.
By the NFL and the Saints rebuilt the city, which I think is a bunch of bunk.
Right.
So I think they specifically chose the Saints to go through this. And then I think they did this specifically because of the whole concussion issue surrounding the league. That it's all meant to be, a thing of player safety. And the league is literally worried about 1,500 former players suing them over concussions and head injuries.
Right.
So I think now that they can go to, if this gets brought up in court that, some coach told us to put a bounty on this guy and I hit him and now he has, brain damage. Well, they could say we had no idea this was going on, and as soon as we did, we cracked down on it as hard as we possibly could.
Right. And not only that, but then they came out with this story that Mickey Loomis was wiretapping other teams.
Yeah.
And that's gone away, by the way.
Oh, yeah. Well, so has the investigation supposedly of Sean Payton. Him and some of his coaches were supposedly stealing prescription drugs.
Yeah.
And one of the security guys on the team busted him for that, and that never came out in full. Instead, they got rid of that security official, who used to be an FBI agent.
Interesting. Very interesting.
Well, it's even like Spygate. If you want to go back to Spygate, when Josh McDaniels was an assistant coach on the Patriots during the Spygate scandal, he became the head coach of the Denver Broncos. He got busted for basically doing the exact same thing in Denver, videotaping the opposing coaches' signals. He got fired in Denver, and then he got rehired as now he's defensive coordinator in New England again.
Yeah, that's right. Absolutely.
But again, the league's worried about their integrity.
Yeah. What about the Army? The Army is the armed forces in general, but I think the Army is actually the number one sponsor of the NFL. Isn't that right?
I don't know. I couldn't tell you who really is.
It is. Yeah, they're the number one sponsor, and we have this notion of patriotism that's also, it's marketed through the NFL, and the Army's the number one sponsor, and yet we have these games which are bet on illegally to the tune of billions of dollars each year. It's kind of fascinating. So what's next for you? What are you working on?
My hope is I got another book that's written that'll come out hopefully next year. It's going to be called Larceny Games, and it's about sports gambling, game fixing from a gambling aspect, not from the league fixing their own. Which, I don't think every game is fixed by any means.
Mm-hmm.
I just think the leagues do this when they see an opportunity, when they see that they can push a certain storyline or they can make more money. So I don't think every game is, professional wrestling.
Mm-hmm.
But I think they do it more often than people would even consider that they do it. But
Right.
This book is more about game fixing from a sports gambling aspect. And then I got through the Freedom of Information Act well over 400 files about their investigation into sports gambling and game fixing because the leagues basically say that they've never had a game fixed. I mean, baseball says it hasn't had a game fixed by gamblers since 1919.
Mm-hmm.
The NHL hasn't had a game fixed since the 1940s. NBA hasn't a game fixed or points shaved since 1954, and the NFL says it's never, ever once had a game fixed by any outside influence. But yet I have all these FBI files relating to the Major League Baseball, the NBA, and the NFL that say, well, that's probably not true. And I've talked to enough bookmakers and professional sports gamblers who'd also just laugh in the faces of these leagues making those claims.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm trying to prove, because basically I got tired of going on, these sports radio shows and have them say, well, you can't fix a game that's never happened, blah, blah, blah. I got tired of these guys, telling me what was true and what's not. And they didn't know really what the truth was because they didn't bother to investigate. They just believed what the leagues told them.
Right. Well, it's fascinating, and yet you still watch football. Obviously, I mean, I know these games are fixed, but I still watch anyway. Why do you still watch?
I watch it to see what's doing.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, basically, it's funny because it's kind of almost become my job.
Yeah.
To police these games in a sense.
Yeah.
That's why I watch. Mm-hmm. If I hadn't written the book, if I hadn't written this other book that'll come out next year, I probably wouldn't watch anymore.
Right.
I don't find it interesting. I mean, I find like one of the things I've been writing about on my website this year is I find the NFL just completely boring this year. I don't see anything of interest. Anything? No. I mean, and I don't know why people tune in every day.
The Thursday night games have been atrocious.
Yeah.
Terrible. They should abolish Thursday night football. It's just.
Well, that's another thing. The league talks about, we're concerned about player safety. Well, so we'll take players who play on Sunday and make them play 3 days later on Thursday night.
Exactly.
That's really safe, huh?
Yeah, exactly. So when I was doing a little bit of research for you, I realized that the husband of the woman who wrote the book, the Blind Side, his name is Brian Tui, right?
Yeah.
Are you related to him?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay.
It's funny because Tui is an odd last name, and it's spelled. I've seen it spelled probably 4 different ways, and yet theirs is spelled exactly the same way as my name.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, as far as I know, I'm not related to him.
And then there's a guy by the name of Roger Tui who is like a notorious gangster in Chicago.
Again, he's another one I don't think I'm related to him either, but I haven't really looked into.
So it's interesting. So on one side you've got the gambling side, right, with Roger Tui, and on the other side you've got the football side with Brian Tui, and then you're kind of right in the center with football and gambling.
Yeah, I know it's kind of bizarre in a way.
It is really strange. Well, listen, I really enjoyed talking with you, and look forward to seeing what you cook up and come up with. And we still have a few weeks left in this season, and I'm sure there's going to be at least 2 or 3 games where people are just going to scratch their heads and say, "What the hell happened here?" Now, if people want to find out more about the book and more about your real-time commentary, where can they go?
They can go to my website, which is thefixesin.net. I'm on Facebook and Twitter under The Fixes in Tui, which is Tuohy. Mm-hmm. Or the book is available at like Amazon, Barnes & Noble, wherever they sell books. Hopefully The Fixes in is there.
Okay. Brian, thank you for coming on the show today. Really appreciate it, and keep up the good work, okay?
Thanks. I appreciate you having me on.
All righty. That was Brian Tui, and he is the author of The Fix is In, and we went down a rabbit hole there in regards to professional sports gambling, and not only fixing the results for monetary interest, but also for perception and for marketing dollars, TV dollars, attention, playing your emotional signal, you name it, it's there. So partake, but know what you're partaking in and do your best to use your perceptual abilities to redefine what you're seeing most of the time. In the last year during the Super Bowl, we were given Madonna and her blatantly luminous halftime show, which I broke down on my website. One of the most popular posts I've had to date on the website. This year, for the Super Bowl, they're bringing Beyonce in, and we'll no doubt see Jay-Z and also Kanye West, and the set and most of the production will be choreographed by Ez Devlin, who was the choreographer for the closing ceremonies of the London Summer Olympics, and she's done all of the most of the live shows for Jay-Z and Kanye, the tour that they were on, and I believe Gaga. So she's in the mix, and she'll be doing the Super Bowl at halftime this year. So if you thought that the Madonna production, Madonna as Isis production, was a big deal, just wait till this Super Bowl. It'll be even bigger and even more symbolic than ever before. I'm wondering when Kiss will play the halftime show at the Super Bowl. That would be interesting. Knights in the Service of Satan, a.k.a. Kiss. I was a Kiss fan when I was a kid. Who wasn't? But I was a Kiss fan before they were Kiss fans. So Kiss had 2 studio albums, and then they had the live album, which completely catapulted them into stardom. Kiss Alive. I saw the Kiss Alive tour, by the way, at the Oakland Coliseum. Bob Seger opened for Kiss. I didn't know who Bob Seger was at the time. I sure did afterwards. He was amazing, absolutely amazing. And KISS nearly burned down the Oakland Coliseum with one of their fire pots and Gene Simmons pyrotechnics. One of the curtains caught on fire on the Oakland Coliseum stage. Luckily, they were heavily flame retardant. And I think it was the first time I did marijuana. It was at a KISS concert. So I don't do marijuana anymore, but I did then. So I can blame my drug addiction on KISS, or my teenage drug addiction, Knights in the Service of Satan. There we go. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the election, and then put a wrap on this thing. And I'll be back hopefully Monday. It is Veterans Day on Monday. There is a slight chance that I may not be on the air Monday, only because I will have to spend time with my son, who might be out of school then. But if that is not the case, then I will be on the air and doing the mashup. And then Wednesday, of course, Navigating the Astrological Matrix. And Friday, George Norrie will be on with me, the famous host from Coast to Coast AM. He'll be on here, and it's going to be an hour with George, and we're going to find out just who George Norrie is, what he's about, and what he has up his sleeve. He's going to make an announcement on my show. I can't talk about it yet. Special announcement. He's going to talk about it on my show on Friday, and I'm trying to get a hold of Mr. Ancient Alien himself, George Tsoukalos, and he might be on the show as well. We'll see about that. He's already agreed to be on the show. It's just a matter of time. We'll have one George, I promise, on Friday. There will be one George on Friday. That's next week. Don't miss it. It'll be an interesting show. So the election. Where do we want to go with this? The numbers around the election are really fascinating, because Mitt Romney won the popular vote and Barack Obama won the electoral vote. And so we have a nation divided. Half the nation did not want Barack Obama on a popular level to be president of the United States. I think, and I'm not lamenting the loss of Mitt Romney. Trust me, Mitt Romney is not a guy you'd want for president. He's just not. He's a corporate raider. He's a heartless son of a bitch, and he's a Mormon, which I won't hold against him. But I will hold his cold-blooded economics against him. He was also a dyed-in-the-wool neocon, and he promised to bring every single neocon that he could back from the dead from the George Bush era. And what was really interesting is that Benjamin Netanyahu, and this doesn't normally happen, by the way, Netanyahu does not get involved in the overt marketing and machinations of a presidency or an election. In fact, whether it was Netanyahu or Sharon or Perez, none of those guys came out and said, this guy is the guy that should be president. Netanyahu did. He backed Romney. And one of the reasons he backed Romney is because they went to college together. And the other reason he backed Romney is because Romney would do anything he wanted him to do. Now, that's not to say that Obama won't do anything that Israel would want Obama to do. He probably will. They've got, I'm sure, plenty of salacious photos of Obama doing things that we've all talked about and thought about. So they've got that stuff in reserve. They can pop that anytime. So this is what happens with presidents. They're there because they're compromised. And once they're compromised, Bill Clinton was compromised. He was compromised in two different ways. He's compromised by his activity in Arkansas, but more recently he was compromised by, or after the fact, he was compromised by the Vince Foster affair, and then by the Monica Lewinsky affair, in which he was completely compromised. And at that point, we saw the acceleration of the United States into the Balkans and dealing with and bombing Kosovo and that region of the world. Not fun, not a good place. not a good place to be, terrible time. And the United States was providing air support for all those NATO troops going in there and rooting out those sovereign countries. Kind of like, hey, guess what? You've just gotten independence. Now you're sovereign. Hey, guess what? No, you're not. We're taking people out of there. And whether or not you believe that Ceausescu was a murderer and was the Caligula of the modern era or not, doesn't really matter. They went in and they removed him. That was the model for what we're seeing now. What happened with Ceausescu is the model for what we're seeing now. What's been happening since 9/11/2001 with the fall of Iraq, Saddam Hussein, and so on, and so on, and so on. And they're trying it right now with Assad in Syria. So we have half the country that said, no, we don't want Barack Obama. And apparently there's another half that does. It's a house divided. And people are saying that America died on Tuesday. I disagree. America died on November 22nd, 1963, when John F. Kennedy was shot. That's when America died. The day John Kennedy died was the day that America died. Everything after that has just been an epilogue, a postscript to the history of the United States. Every candidate, with maybe the exception of Richard Nixon, although he was an insider, every candidate has been chosen based on their bloodline, based on their ability to be compromised, based on the cabal that they're a part of, and whose dirty work they'll do at the drop of a hat. That's where it's been since Kennedy. Even Kennedy was like that to a certain extent, but Kennedy went rogue, which is why he is no longer there. People say that America died on Tuesday. No, America died when they took the hostages in Iran, and Jimmy Carter was going to free them. And of course, there was the major malfunction with the liberation effort, and completely and utterly cut the legs off from beneath the Carter presidency. Now, there are some people who think that Jimmy Carter was a clone and is still a clone. That might be the case. But I'll tell you right now, any shot at rebalancing the United States and getting it back to a place that was pre-Kennedy or close to the Kennedy rhythm and vibration, that went away. That went away the day that Ronald Reagan came into office, because America died a little more that day. When Reagan came into office, we witnessed deregulation like you would not believe. It was the end of tariffs. It was the beginning of globalism, which they used to call industrialism, global trade. It was essentially the birth of the Walmartification of America when Ronald Reagan took office. Everything was paved. The roads are being paved for globalization of the world and the United States. America died that day. America died when George Bush took office after 8 years of Reagan. And it died when George Bush took us to war the first time in Iraq based on phony circumstances and utter false pretense. America died when George Bush said, we now have the ability to experience a new world order. And I believe this new world order, which will be the rule of law, to be the one thing that will save humanity, something like that. America died a little bit more that day. America has been on the death watch ever since 11/22/63. So to say that America died on Tuesday might sound great. It might be a great soundbite. Not even close. America died on 9/11/2001. America really died then. So that's my thoughts on the election and the death of America. We've been living in the aftermath for well over a decade. And as far as what's coming, well, I'll tell you what's coming. You saw what's coming. the stock market went off the rails. It slid off of a precipice. Companies are going to start to cut their employees loose. Why are they going to cut them loose? Well, I'll tell you why. Because under Obamacare, anybody that works 35 to 40 hours a week, that company is going to be required to pay extra taxes so that that employee would be covered. Well, guess what these companies are going to do? They're going to turn those employees into part-time employees. Here's what will happen. They'll say, okay, AutoZone, by the way, has come out and already said this. Okay, we have 15,000 employees. Let's cut 5,000. Let's turn the other 10,000 into part-time employees. We'll just split it right down the middle. Maybe we'll keep 500 full-timers. We can handle the tax burden on 500 employees. Now, what are those full-time people who are barely making a living wage anyway? What are they going to do? Well, they're going to have to go out and get another part-time job. That's what's coming. That is what's coming. And there's more, I'm sure. You know, this whole election, it was really about three issues on the Democratic side: abortion/women's rights, gay marriage, immigration. And what the Democrats did, the Democrats all of a sudden got smart. They got very, very smart. Why did they get smart? Because they had the Chicago Alinsky machine come in and run their program. And so they created issues that polarize people. And that is the fundamental core operating system for rules or radicals. This is exactly what Alinsky was talking about. And what they did is they found three issues that would absolutely, utterly polarize the American public. And the big one, of course, being abortion and women's rights. It's interesting, in the postmortem of the election, I've been reading how Republicans should rethink their stance on the right to life. And this is coming from the Republican side of things. That is, it is an antiquated notion that abortion can be, and the right to choose can be removed from the Constitution. And I would agree with that. I don't think it can ever be removed, at least not now. Maybe if we have Sharia law here, it might be, but it's not going to be. And it's only going to continue to polarize the Republican Party. So if they want to have any inroads into the electorate, especially the female electorate moving forward, they're going to have to drop that. They're going to have to make it a non-issue. And the other thing is, and I've already seen this happening today, is that the Republicans are taking a different stance on immigration. Why? Because the community organizers in the Alinsky army went out and rounded up as many people as possible from the Latino community to vote, with the promise that they're going to continue to not only be here, but they're going to continue to get their entitlements, and their loved ones will be able to continue to come here as well. And in fact, amnesty will no doubt be a part of Barack Obama's mandates for the next 4 years. I would say it's probably coming in 2013. So that's going to happen. So already the Republican Party, as we know it, is going to be reshaped. So who or what is behind it all? Where is this all going? If you go to Henry Mackow's site, it's very interesting. You know, Mackow, if you don't know who he is, his take on all of this is that this is a complete and utter coup, and he believes that it's a coup by the Illuminati/Illuminist Jewish banking cabal, the Kabbalah cabal. And he makes some very good points around this whole thing. And that's his That's his piece. That's his MO. And I think that there's some traction here. There is definitely some traction. And if you look at, the forces that have shaped public perception over the last 8 to 10 years, you'll find links to a lot of banking interests. And it's all about destabilizing the population. And that's what's been going on. And so I don't think the challenge or the struggle for people to remain free or to be free or to have freedom of choice, because equality doesn't always equal freedom. The Communist Party in Russia is a clear example where everybody was equal, but very few people were free. That is going to continue to unfold. People are going to make their own personal choices, often at great sacrifice, and in the face of an institutionalization. And that institutionalization could come from Tel Aviv or New York or London or Washington, D.C. or wherever. And people are going to continue to do their best to retain their dignity, their individuality, and their ability to live their lives in a way that only they, themselves, and God can say, all right, this is my choice, this is what I'm doing, this is how I'm choosing to live. And that's the end of the story. And that's what we're up against now. It's really come down to the individual versus the machine versus the board. And it could look like the Illuminist Jewish banking cabal from London, New York, Tel Aviv. It could look like that. But ultimately, what are they? Who are they? They're an amalgamation of consciousness. And that consciousness is a machine-like consciousness. It assimilates, and it destroys what it doesn't assimilate. And it's doing its very best to assimilate us and everything else. And so what are we doing around it? Well, hopefully we're waking up, and this is part of what's going on here. In my life, I can attest to the fact that the awakening process is alive and on schedule 24/7. And if we look at things in our lives that are challenging us, there are opportunities to wake up. There are opportunities to make choices that are better for who we are. There are opportunities for us to show resolve in the face of challenge or struggle or fear. It's an opportunity to face ourselves. It's an opportunity to stretch ourselves. How can we have resolve without losing the ability to love? Because when we create the other, then something fundamental changes about us. We create walls, not bridges. So it's a tricky place we're in, because what we have to do is we have to discern, say, this isn't good, this isn't right, we're not down with this, this doesn't work for me. But at the same time, we have to affirm what does. We can't get stuck in no. Because if we get stuck in no, then nothing really happens. No is a big part of nothing. And that's the challenge. That's where we are right now. So do your best to keep loving your hearts and realize that what's happening is happening so that more people can rattle the chains and awaken to what's really clear and present in their lives and in the lives of other people around us. And those are my thoughts post-election. Let it serve as a moment of awakening for you and for everybody else. Get over your grief. America died a long time ago. Mitt Romney not getting elected was not going to save America anyway. Trust me. You let that one go. When the Republicans hijacked their convention and didn't let Ron Paul win, that was a big deal. It was actually a bigger deal than Romney losing. How do those Romneyites feel now? Because Ron Paul might have beaten Barack Obama even more soundly than Romney did at the polls, not the electorate. Okay, that's it. I'm done for today. Thank you for listening, and I want to thank Brian Tui for spending time with me and getting into this whole notion of the profession of sports, professional sports being fixed. I'll be back on Monday. Hopefully, just check back here on the show page. You can follow me on Facebook. I'm Robert Phoenix on Facebook. You can go to the website. I'm working on a new post, robertphoenix.com. And hopefully within the next 30 to 60 days, I will have a FAR radio site up and running. That is the plan for the next 30 to 60 days. And then, of course, next Friday, George Norrie will be on the show. We'll find out more about the man behind the mic, who he is, where he came from, and where he thinks all this is going. Okay, so thank you. And again, always thank you to Erica Merriger for putting these shows up on YouTube, where you can find them as well. And it is a Free Association Radio on YouTube. The recording quality tends to be just a tad bit better, and there's less hang-ups in the playback. So I want to thank Erica for that and all the other little stuff she does. And that's it. Use your head to discern what's real, your heart to step in what's possible. I'm Robert Phoenix. I want to thank everyone for dialing in and listening today. It's good to be back, and I will see you all on Monday. Have a very, very good weekend.
We are living in a computer-programmed reality, and the only clue we have to it is when some variable is changed and some alteration in our reality occurs. We would have the overwhelming impression that we were reliving the present, déjà vu, perhaps in precisely the same way, hearing the same words, saying the same words. I submit that these impressions are valid and significant, and I will even say this: such an impression is a clue that at some past time point a variable was changed, reprogrammed as it were, and that because of this an alternative world branched off.